We are the Society of Hong Kong Indie Studies. Following the theme of informality, we are a very informal society dedicated to studying indie music for now in Hong Kong, and we're so informal that all we have is a WhatsApp group and an Instagram page. We have members from many disciplines, as well as non-academics in the traditional sense, practitioners and participants in the indie scene, like Gigi herself. We believe that knowledge production isn't just for universities and people who work or study in universities, but should be a discourse with those on the ground. And so our little society, we have two sides. One is academic facing, where we attend conferences like the one that we're doing right now. We do panels, and there's some of the examples of the places that we presented so far. And the other side is a public facing or the scene facing side, where we bring an academic-based discourse to a wider audiences, but we explain it in Yanhua, or human understandable language, so we can stimulate more thought and more discussion, more discourse about indie music. And so we publish short articles, we have podcasts, we have short videos, interviews, and we hope to let more people know about the Hong Kong indie music scene. And without further ado, I introduce to you our first panelist, Eric Zheng, who is a lecturer at the Division of Languages and Communication, College of Professional and Continuing Education at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. That's a mouthful. His main research interests include the systemic functional linguistics and discourse analysis. Under the name of Eric Peace, he writes songs as a solo musician and was the founding member of Hong Kong indie bands such as Hard Candy, In This Fallen, The Tranquil Summer Sea, and my favorite, Gatling Gun Revival. Eric.
Please, Jonathan. Please. Okay, so this is my topic about Hong Kong blues, or Kowloon blues in specific, when blues music meets Cantonese lyrics in a struggling Hong Kong. So from the next slide on, I'll go off script. So the agenda will be like, I'm going to talk about why I'm doing this study, and I'll also talk about the authenticity and innovation and the tension between them as a musician or as a Hong Kong musician playing a special genre of music. And I also ask questions about what legitimates a kind of imported music genre to give it a label of Hong Kong. So before I begin, you can see the focus of my study is on one person. It's this guy in the middle playing his favorite telly. And you can see from his attire, very retro looking, and he was trying to stick with the authentic kind of blues attire in the Chicago scene. And you can also see his own gears, the little amplifier right here. I think that's a pig nose. I think that's a common gear for a blues musician to go with the lo-fi DIY kind of a gear, in that he also plugs his retro-looking microphone into the amp to give that retro sounding. Okay, so before I move on to my research question, I would love to talk about my position first, as Jonathan has already introduced me with a very, thanks for doing the introduction in one go, in one breath. I know my affiliation is pretty long. And I have another alter ego as a musician in Hong Kong. So I feel myself to be in a legitimate position to talk about an exceptional case in Hong Kong, because I'm sure you know something about the indie scene, if there's a scene at all. I'm quoting, quote, a scene. But playing blues or playing jazz in Hong Kong is pretty much like going off the mainstream of the indie. So what is happening there? So if he's not looking for fame, if he's not looking for sales, what he's actually looking at. So my main research question would be, how does the context of Hong Kong give rise to a localized type of blues music or identities? Because my research interests, I need to also tell you I'm a linguist, I do language studies, but so when I'm looking at musicology research, I also take a language perspective onto it. So I use narrative inquiry of individuals, because according to Jonathan Stock in his 2001 paper, talking about the rising trend of doing biographic writing for ethnomusicology. It's one of the reasons that we are looking at exceptional people within a particular culture. So this gentleman, bluesman, I'm going to introduce to you, fits into this category. And through the interview, because we share the same background as a musician, as a one growing up in Hong Kong and struggling between dreams and realities. So definitely I don't look like a musician right now. So just because. So there are lots of reasons behind why we are trying not to stick with one particular profession as a full-time musician. Okay, so we had an interview in a noodle place last year when there was still pandemic, but they allow dinner after 6. So it took around 105 minutes because we did the interview eating, munching our noodles. And it's semi-structured, but the theme is based around my research questions and issues about identity, like how authentic he is thinking about his music as a bluesman, and aside from the legitimacy and how he defines Hong Kong blues. And the interview was conducted in Cantonese, but I transcribed it, trying to keep the wording as best as I can. So if there is anything that I'm not translating very well, the blame is on me. Okay, so the original name of bluesman is Chen Si-cai. Okay, so according to our friend Heidi Kwong, in her MA dissertation, so bluesman is a self-proclaimed or once billed as blues player in performance. So in the scene of Hong Kong independent music, playing blues is not a mainstream thing, as I have just explained to you a couple of minutes ago. But he has been playing in various bands, like focusing on blues music or like some very niche kind of music like rockabilly. So if you do watch View TV, or if you do watch commercial radios awards shows, you may have seen the Bluesy Playboys, the ones who don I forgot how to describe their attire, but they look very retro doing rockabilly songs. And he also played in bands like Dumb Man and Quartet, then Sava, and more currently Bluesman and Wolfman Jack Band. So you can see his performance with his band in coming shows. And I also have included excerpts of his performance, his music later on in the presentation. So he's also a well-established player, performing in major festivals like Cotton Flab or even at a Hong Kong Coliseum. So the reason why he's the special one to research is that I'm sure a lot of us do play blues music from time to time, or if we do love the Beatles, for example, we play some blues tunes. But he's the one in, I think, some 20 or 30 years who has released mostly Cantonese blues album called Kowloon Blues and other assorted love songs. So as I mentioned, we grew up similarly, being in touch with various kinds of music like Britpop, Japanese pop, new metal, and then he found blues after being in some like cover bands and whatnot, and doing shows, playing covers. And it's also a time when the imported music or the different new genres of music are imported to Hong Kong. And we've spent our 20s in the local music scene, like at the blues bar called the 48th Street Chicago Blues, one of the venues in 2000s as musicians. It's now closed. It's in Tsim Sha Tsui, and it's run by a blues guitarist come lawyer called Tommy Jung. And that's what he said when I first met him in 2003. Okay, so I've reached the age of like cracking dad jokes and talking about those were the days things. And I've been in the scene since the early 2000s. And he said, only blues music by African American players is authentic. Okay, so how does this position the music played by Hong Kong people then? So like blues music, when we have a call, we have response. And this response doesn't have to be resonant. And Jabin Law, also our friend, said in an interview that I did with him a couple of years ago, who said, I don't believe in this bullshit. One doesn't have to be black to play blues. And one doesn't have to speak English to play blues, because we all know originally blues as like an African American kind of music genre is like originally in English. So what then? So what legitimates Hong Kong blues to see then? So he says to tell apart from blues music played by Hong Kong blues players, Hong Kong blues is defined by releasing musical pieces. So that's his motivation to record his album. And his second album has just been finished recording, according to his social media. And but aside from that, he also plays canonical standards, like I've Got the Mojo Working and all those Chicago blues things that you may be familiar with. And he also tries to achieve a tone accuracy by using the particular gear that his favorite musicians like, and understanding the genre's history. But as very soon you will find, his blues music, or the quote blues music, is not that kind of hardcore blues, or like retro or authentic blues. Because if we are talking about defining music genres or what it means to be Hong Kong, it's defined by audience. If you go to YouTube and check the comments, like, oh, he plays like B.B. King, or he plays like Freddie or Muddy Waters. But but very, very rarely about his techniques or about his establishments as an ancient people very good at blues music. I'm about to finish. So the dogma of what blues is highly subjective, but actually no one cares about that. It's more or less like, I like it or I don't like it. But if you want to define what Hong Kong is, because we now talk a lot about Hong Kong people, Hong Kong movies, Hong Kong music, is like ontologically unclassified, and we don't have a universal epistemological frame to understand what Hong Kong means. So it's very much like Hong Kong as a pre-modified. So I'm talking about language. Nerving you guys out. So Hong Kong as a modifier is actually axiologically dense. So for example, it's between two extremes, like East meeting West. I'm not saying which is better or which is worse. It's just that there's a climb in between these two extremes, like authoritarian versus freedom, and you know what I mean, and indie versus canto pop, or even in indie, you have the mainstream and the indie side. And then live houses, the concert venues, dreams and reality. As I told you, I'm now one of the white collars in the room in the academic industry. But talking about playing music to make ends meet, is it the reality in Hong Kong? Can we really make it? So that's why we talk about the struggle between music and work when we talk about Hong Kong music. And also, has to do with the language question that Professor Alice Chick and Phil Benson talked about 10 years ago when they were still at Education University of Hong Kong. Okay, I think my time is almost up. So you can actually hear some of the ways that he is framing his music. So you can hear it's not like all the way hardcore blues music. It has some cantopop influence, like a bit of insanity, even some in intro, like an exact copy, as he admitted as the album's intro. And if you belong to my generation, you know who Wong Hit is. And you can also see some songs like Why They Say, or it's actually a cowboy set song influenced by his rockabilly alter ego. And then aside from doing all-out blues music, he also works with rappers doing I Miss Everything. So if you're interested in his music, buy his CD or his vinyl. So this is a cowboy set song. I'm going to skip it. So you can see there's nothing blues about it, but he, as a musician, sounds quite blues himself. So I'm going to skip this slide because like authentic blues is a representative form of the past, whereas composers popular music. So he belongs to the current contemporary that kind of genre. So he has to push the boundary in order to innovate. Okay, so blues as culturally mobile and constantly evolving form to which reinterpretation is vital. So he's trying to move away from the original African American, that kind of black music. But when we talk about blues as a kind of sad music or talking about money, women, or the lack of both, or either, so I'm sure this is lost in translation because I mentioned that live in music is very much like the buntai, or the core of the music. So he said that blues represents his life so much because he has experienced divorce and bankruptcy some time ago. So he is blues enough to be legitimate to me. So, but we don't really have to victimize him to see him as a blues musician. So he would say blues is a tool to Ben because still in happy blues, or he can use a different perspective to look at life. So when you hear happy blues like Howlin' Blues, there's pessimism behind it. So if you look at the lyrics, if you read the lyrics later on, you will see the pessimism behind that. But you still feel happy about it because he wants to let the good times roll. I think the time, 1 minute, good. So this is still work in progress. So I will still look into the language question. Very soon I will have a chat with some media interviews about why we are still using English as a medium of expression in Hong Kong music, because I'm also the one who writes lyrics in English. So what's the underlying meaning behind that? And we also want to look at what the legitimate basis of Hong Kong blues or bluesmen from a sociological gaze, whether it's like knowledge driven, whether it's knowledge built, or whether it's like axiologically, or is built upon the understanding or the sentiments of knowers or the attitudes of knowers. And I also know this gentleman called Ram Zhang, the bluesy cat. Actually, the bluesy cat played with C-Type, the bluesman in Dumb Man Quartet. But now he's playing his own solo stuff with, Shake That Thing, more swingy, that kind of blues. So it will be interesting to look at the tale of two blues musicians, to look at his story and to know more about the rationale for doing like a more traditional kind of swing blues music in Hong Kong. So I think I have kept my time pretty well. I'm not eating too much of your time, Francois.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm not going to show you my reference list because it doesn't mean anything. But if you want to look at my PowerPoint slides, I'm more than happy to share with you. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks, Eric. Francois is the Assistant Professor of Humanities and Cultural Studies in the Department of Humanities and Creative Writing at the Hong Kong Baptist University. He holds a PhD in Communication Studies from McGill University, and his research interests include cultural scenes, cultural infrastructures, popular and experimental music, do-it-yourself or DIY, and improvisation studies, health humanities, digital AI in artistic practices, and identity construction in industrialized minority contexts with extensive ethnographic experience in Hong Kong and Seattle, the province of Quebec in Canada, and many other places.
I should have written a shorter bio.
He's currently leading the Hong Kong Live Music Study, the first survey of the cultural and social value of the live music sector and of its infrastructures like venues, concert organizations, and promotional agencies across all music genres in Hong Kong. Without further ado, Francois.
Good job, mate.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was some mighty power reading. Sorry for the long bio. Yeah. Anyways, hi everybody. So yes, my name is Francois, and well, it's my pleasure to be here today as part of the Society for Hong Kong Indie Music Studies. Really our first kind of main gig at an academic conference, I think. So yes, I'm here to present some of the work that I've been kind of tracking as part of the live music studies in the past couple of years in Hong Kong. And what I'm showing today is an aspect of it that I didn't initially anticipate that I would be sort of tracking, but it's the use of social media platform during and after the pandemic, and I guess after as well the post-national security context in Hong Kong. The work that I'm presenting today is very much preliminary, so there's not going to be a lot of fancy theoretical footwork. There's going to be more questions than anything, but I hope you'll find it interesting. So in this presentation, basically, I will reflect, as I said, on the emerging use of specific social media platforms within some communities of independent music practice in Hong Kong. And just briefly, but I'm going to go over this really briefly, what do we mean by independent music? And this is a long debate, I suppose, in popular music studies. There's been two kind of main definitions of independence. One of them is really based on the kind of strategies, the DIY strategies and structures that have helped musicians produce, disseminate, promote music outside of the mainstream music industries. And there's a long history of this going back all the way to punk, most famously, but there's alternative histories out there pointing to that DIY in music is in fact prominent in blues and African-American blues and jazz well earlier. We also, when we say independence, we often think of indie music as a kind of musical aesthetic, I would say, a particular genre, maybe of rock or post-punk. And so that's not the definition that I'm going to be taking really for today's presentation. When I'm talking about independent music in Hong Kong, I'm really referring to a broad range of musical styles. Rock, hip-hop, jazz, blues, as Dr. Chung discussed. I think all of this can be called independent music in Hong Kong because they're operating mostly without financial or operational support from local or global music and entertainment corporations, although that could be debated. On the slide here, you see a couple of examples. You see rapper Luna Isabeb, singer-songwriter Reggie the Leaf, DJ Subi's Yeti, electronic artist Yaolin, singer-songwriter Moon Tang. You see in the bottom left a photo of the Fountain de Chopin venue, which is a jazz venue in an industrial building. And you see as well a photo, bottom right, of Shumking Mansion, a band that does electro dance kind of funk stuff. I don't know how to call them. But my point is, I just simply wanted to illustrate the diversity of genres of music that fall under what we might call independent music in Hong Kong. And, you know, I'm happy if anybody takes issue with this, you know, is this too much? Is this too broad? We can talk about it. But that's my argument for today. Doing independent music in Hong Kong has been difficult, as Dr. Chung here has rightfully pointed out a couple of years in writing. There's the overwhelming presence, of course, of Cantopop in Hong Kong in terms of popularity, of course, in terms of industry, and this is not at all a shot at Cantopop. It's a great music genre, but it just dominates, and there's simply not a lot of space for the practice of other music genres in the city, it seems like. Other problems, really, as we know, Hong Kong is not a cheap place to live or to operate a business, so high rents have really hindered the activities of a lot of independent musicians or promoters, simply because if you don't make a lot of profit, well, it's hard to make rent. And on top of this, we're talking about a context where licensing policies for running venues is particularly complicated. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into this today, but there's a long list of difficulties that people who want to run a venue, for example, have to navigate in order to stay alive or even to open. So there's been, in short, a lack of brick and mortar spaces for the practice of independent music in Hong Kong. On top of this, of course, there was the pandemic. And before this, there was the social movement, which also affected traffic in a lot of the venues in Hong Kong. So let's say over the course of the pandemic, as I've argued elsewhere, many small and mid-scale venues have closed. I've called it deterritorialization. So essentially, there's little territory for independent music in the city. And that's been basically getting worse. So what I've been observing as I was doing this live music study, tracking the closures of these venues, is in parallel a kind of rise of use of social media, different platforms that independent music actors have been using in order to promote, in order to get together, in order to communicate, really. And what I've been sort of seeing, or what I'm arguing I'm seeing, is a kind of double move towards, on the one hand, increased popularity and visibility for some independent music, as well as the professionalization of some of the independent music practice in Hong Kong, and at the same time, heightened privacy or secrecy for some of the scenes or some of the communities of independent music practice. So I'll give you a couple of examples, or I'll point to a couple of case studies briefly. One of them is Tone Music TV, or some of you may have heard about it as the Tone Music Festival. This is formerly people from the famed venue Hidden Agenda turned This Town Needs shortly before the pandemic. After closure, they reinvented themselves as a festival, online festivals, and now they're an awards show. So this is a really interesting case, and I don't know if it shows very well here in my screen caps, but technically Tone, as a group, as a community, as an organizer, is quite popular if you look at the number of followers that they have on Instagram. We're looking at about 20,000 people, roughly. So that's a lot for, so-called underground independent music. Quite popular. Another good case study, I would argue, in this move towards more visibility, professionalization, is the What's Good Music Awards. And this is primarily a hip-hop music award kind of ceremony. So it's a hip-hop collective that has organized a big-time award show in Hong Kong last year at the convention center, namely. Same thing, if you look at the followers, their followers on Instagram, you're looking at almost like 14,000 people. So that's for a independent hip-hop award show and group of people. So I would say, I'm just sort of skimming the surface here. I'm happy to go into more details afterwards in the Q&A, but I'm arguing here that the way in which these actors are using social media, for the most part, is really to remedy a particular lack of traditional media support for their activities. And they have told me this repeatedly, is that we have no channels to promote our things, so we just use online, right? We just use digital. So I'm quoting here Alex Chu from Tone Music, who says, throughout the process of promoting Tone, we found that Hong Kong starts to lack channels and media to promote cultural stuff. It's dying down very quickly. Before, we had many options, no matter online media or traditional paper media and so on. But now it's hard to find media with in-depth capability to follow what actually we're doing, not just on the surface kind of interviews. So interestingly, they're not really doing that much, I would say, in-depth kind of stuff online, not that I've seen too much of, but instead they're really using IG and Facebook and things like this to just promote upcoming shows and to highlight kind of the main things that they've been doing, so the Tone Music Awards specifically. And so I would say overall that this points towards a form of professionalization or industrialization of independent music in the city. What I think is also interesting is that whether we're talking about Tone Music Awards or the What's Good Hip Hop Music Awards, they tend to adopt the codes of the Hong Kong mainstream industry. Award shows are, of course, extremely famous within Cantopop, right? That's one of the main mode of promotion of Cantopop in a way. They're doing their events as well as much as possible in very large-scale venues, not really venues that we associate with independent, low-key kind of music practice. And they compensate for the lack of mainstream media through their social media advertising and promotion strategies. So that's one tendencies that I've seen kind of emerge and that I find particularly interesting when we talk about independent music practice. Polar opposites. Some independent music actors are increasingly using social media, increasingly messaging groups, to go private. So I'm going to try to go briefly here because I'm running out of time, but for example, There's a venue in Central, chez Trente, which runs its own sort of WhatsApp group, which is private. It's not secret, but it is private to promote its events. Another particular interesting example is the Mansion family. And so the Mansion family was started during the pandemic and quickly became popular, notably with music fans of all kinds who used to go to venues and clubs, perhaps in LKF or on the Hong Kong island. But the music that they feature is clearly diversely indie, rock and roll, hip hop, drum and bass, art exhibitions. It's primarily a community of English-speaking fans of music, which I find interesting as well. We could go into that. But the way in which this WhatsApp group functions, and we're looking at about 750 participants. The way in which the group functions is kind of as a community. They promote events, but actually they're also doing many different things within that group. So they will talk about the logistics of getting to the venue or in the venue, because the venue is secret. It's not advertised anywhere. They're talking about gear rental, but there's also a lot of affective interactions within those private chat groups. So there's humor, there's personal messages, people wishing each other a happy birthday, of course, posting funny memes, that sort of thing. So it's a really different way of using digital platforms to create communities or to talk about independent music in Hong Kong. So I've gone very quickly over this, and again, I'm happy to go more in depth later, but the use of these platforms, I think, mediate two broader and seemingly opposite trends within independent music practice in the city. On the one hand, we have a move towards greater visibility and professionalization, as I said. And I think it reflects greater popularity for diverse popular music genres among Hong Kong audiences, and particularly among Cantonese-speaking audiences. So in this context, I would say digital platforms appear to function as promotional channels of communication, remedying to an extent a kind of industrial void for independent music in the city. The second trend is a move towards a deeper underground across both Cantonese and English-speaking scenes within some independent music communities operating in more private or secret ways, whether by design or by necessity. And so in that context, digital platforms help to generate the building of effective communities and sociality that maybe more traditionally take place in physical venues through informal messages. Across both trends, I argue, digital platforms are increasingly key infrastructures in both formal and informal activities of independent Hong Kong music scenes. In doing so, digital platforms produce an alternative music promotional ecosystem that at the same time mirrors and subverts the codes of the traditional Hong Kong music industries. And that's a contradiction that I'm particularly interested in further exploring. Here, I'm drawing on some of the ideas that have come out of digital platform studies and people such as Plantin and some of his colleagues, pointing to the fact that digital technologies have made possible a platformization of infrastructure, including music infrastructure, while at the same time also infrastructuralizing platforms. So without platforms, what kind of infrastructures does independent music practice have in Hong Kong? That's a question that I'm interested in. So this is sort of the stage of the project that I'm at. I'm now sort of trying to zoom out a little bit and reflect on some of these elements of these two trends that I just outlined for you today. And I'm borrowing from some theorists to point to the role of infrastructures in creating socialities, in creating specific politics, in creating specific effectivities. And so that's one of the questions that I'm now trying to bring a little bit of an answer to. What forms of live music socialities, politics, and effectivities are being constructed by these infrastructuralized platform interactions within the Hong Kong independent music scenes, and how? Also, taking a leaf from the late Laurent Berlin, who points out that infrastructure is not the same as a system or a structure. as we're currently seeing them, because infrastructure is defined by the movement or patterning of social form. So how are different forms of openness and privacy in specific Hong Kong independent music scenes constructed by these digital infrastructures? Can they function as lasting industry replacements in light of the void that I mentioned before? So I'll stop with these questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Francois. Also, one thing to note for everyone is that we are video recording only us on the presentation side, and we will switch it off for Q&A. This is just a public service announcement. The next one will be Gigi. Her performance name is Astro Joke. She is a multimedia artist practicing experimental music, deconstructing music, DJing, zine publishing, graffiti, performing arts, and calligraphy. On the other hand, she is also an aspiring scholar and writer on several topics, including Hong Kong and Taiwan indie music, art reenactment, queer culture, colonial identity, and film. Her creative work and queer energy are always transgressing the limits of traditional stereotypes and challenging the entrenched power dynamics. Gigi, yeah.
You will give me the iPad.
Oh.
Oh,
Hello.
Okay. Okay. Hi, I'm Gigi, and also I have my stage name is Astro Joke, but you can you don't need to remember it. And I think my topic may be the most sensitive one between us, and I think it's interesting for you guys to know more about it. And it's about government gaze and self-policing, the evolution of the current Hong Kong indie scene, music scene under surveillance. Jonathan has already mentioned me, and I'm also a writer, artist, and also I make a lot of scene, and I also play DJ, etc. And I can mention about in Hong Kong we have an indie music platform that all of us can stream the music. We can download the music. We can upload the music there, and it's called indiecast.fm, and the blue one. And this is also I'm the editor inside. I write a lot of like the indie pop or tree pop music introduction, etc. Too much about it. Okay, so first I will tell you, because I will use Foucault theory. I want to make it more concrete. So I will analyze the Foucaultian gaze of government authorities towards the Hong Kong indie music scene and how it has transformed from a limited physical entity to an internalized omnipresence. This is the not the final PowerPoint. I don't know why. So I will move forward, and I will talk about the social control mechanism of Foucault called the panopticon, and it's become a comprehensive symbol for modern authority and also the social control. And based on this theory, I can briefly talk about it. Is just like the design of this panopticon is to monitor the prisoners with the guards, and their authority changes from being a limited physical entity to being internalized omnipresent. And the prisoner discipline themselves simply because someone might be watching. So you can see the photo. I quickly putting the scene of Hong Kong indie scene in this kind of a jail or what, to like a metaphor. Okay, so we come to the reality. Hong Kong government selectively gaze into some of the lifestyles in Hong Kong, and eventually those musicians feel like they may be observed anytime. Also, there are some concrete or some visible excuse of Hong Kong governments, like foreign musicians don't have working permits, and also charging them, violating the title deeds, or unable to meet fire service requirements. About Hong Kong Lifehouse, and most of the indie musicians, they have tried to negotiate with government, but they totally failed. Like the land department, Sek-Wan, but they still crack down on different venues. Indie musicians are reluctant to obey the government's building policies. they think the crackdown is to force them to move to the venues that the government approve of. Yes, but in the musician, they totally don't want to go to those values like West Kowloon Central District and also some expensive commercial venue like KITEC. And one, as this event is quite pop for some of the Indian musicians, like this is in the Star Hall I mentioned before. Yes, some of the musicians will exclude it and also reluctant to join inside. Okay, and I will also mention this venue. It is Hidden Agenda. It opened in 2009, despite the aforementioned issues. The government did not reform any building codes or laws, but kept a constant gaze on the lighthouse operation. And there is a well-known case that a British band performed in HA, Hidden Agenda, in May 2017. The government sent undercover immigration officers to the performance and arrested 7 people, including the person in charge of the venue, and they were charged with ordinary assault and obstruction of an officer. The band members were also arrested and later released. And also a case that I didn't write here is about foreign band Insomnium and Offers Omega were warned not to perform in HA while they went through the customs in Hong Kong. So you can see the government used different legislation and restrictions to charge HA, like not having entertainment, and this is also another example, like not having entertainment or liquor license or working visas to force them eviction. Okay, so this is an example that in 2017, one of the members of HA, they released their documentary, and he also mentioned that I respect everyone's energy, but I just don't accept the FEHD's frequent visits to our venue, and their constant threats of shutting us down if we don't get licenses to run our live house. And it is also mentioned that the topic I mentioned before, they did a lot of negotiation but failed. And he said here is, we have held protest marches, we have negotiated with governments, we have tried to get legislators to help us even before the industrial building revitalization scheme started, and we were already part of a group of the industrial building artists using the industrial units in this way. So, and lastly, and he said, we don't need to mention again the flaws in this scheme, and it's common knowledge by now. Yeah, so in this post, I think he already mentioned the issues that deep down in Hong Kong, in the music scene between the Hong Kong government, the conflict between them. Yes, and this is also a venue in Hong Kong, but to protect this venue's identity, so I will make it a fake name, and we can call it View. And this is also a DIY live music venue in Hong Kong. And the government is trying using different laws to shut them down and turf them out of the building. The government's industrial building scheme, which seems to solve these issues, actually requires an astronomical investment to renovate industrial buildings to comply with new regulation. And and the name of this venue, why it remains anonymous, because some of the owners and people that perform there also have some political backgrounds. So if events are also essentially only made known to insiders, allowing the venue to remain underground. Yes. So those phenomena that I mentioned before, what did they pose afterwards is the coping mechanisms to counter the government gaze. Maybe coping mechanism is a quite negative term, so I will elaborate more how it becomes the ethos, the vibe, or how we deem in the music scene nowadays. It is a quite vital point that to cause the indie music scene nowadays. Okay. So the Hong Kong government has limited the freedom of scenes to conduct performance and let them to look to alternate modes of communications. Musicians, organize and audience in the scenes discipline themselves through maintaining a degree of alertness of police presence and threats when conducting activities. They have developed measures to mitigate risks, such as insisting the participant refrain from taking photos or video during performance. This result of government oppression has somehow turned into a core efforts and defining some feature of this scene. And the left corner is one of association in indie music association. They launch a lot of indie music show, and you can see below them is say DM for details. This is most of the ways that we to invite the people we trust to enter this scene. So you DM our FB or DM our IG to know more about the location or other informations. Yes. And I can also talk about my own experience because I have launched event before in those underground scene, and one time I launched an event before inviting people to come rave and move their bodies with the music that I create. But this event is stayed low profile because actually I'm afraid of letting some people that are not they are unfamiliar or they don't understand some underground shows, the vibe of the underground show or some hidden rules of the underground show. So our management is to just invite something we trust or some mutual friends or some related people to our scenes. And I think this is not only my case, and most of the people that in this scene is taking this ways. Yeah. But it's not that negative. You can see why indie music scene is so-called underground. It's also because of this phenomenon and the ways that we take. Yeah, and lastly, I will share a graph that I make. Hope it is not too ugly. So you can simply see many police. They represent the thing I mentioned before, like astronomical investment. Also the criminal charges, like that you can see license, program, working visa, and it becomes the internalized omnipresent. Like, oh, this is in our lives, and every day we launch show, every day we go to watch the show, to participate. We need to effort, we need to bear this consequence or bear this fear. So I think it's becoming an internalized omnipresent, yeah. And inside is the performance, and I think this somehow in a negative way may cause trust issue and also some PSC of the performers. Like some of them may giving up performing because they afraid of the consequence of getting charged or etc. And also like the coping mechanism, also hostility. But I think in a positive way, like this, transform their resistant energy into music. I think this is normal. It's quite most of them are having this energy, and I can see they like a punk band or some anarchist band, they are really voicing out their opinions or their perception through their lyrics, through their melody. So I think this is also a strong energy that they render. Yes. Yeah. I am. You can ask me any question about the scenes or anyways.
Cool, thank you, PG. And now we come to the last presentation, which is by me. I am a longtime musician, participant, and audience member in the Hong Kong indie scene, having played in my own band and for other artists. I began my PhD in ethnomusicology in 2022, following the completion of my MPhil, which focuses on boundary, social mediation, and precarity in the indie scene. It's really weird to change this into first person. I have since befriended many musicians in the scene and it has become a familiar face at gigs. I am frequently seen shuffling through the crowd at gigs with a camera and pestering various people with annoying questions.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, so my paper is called 一齊 or together, and in Cantonese is the word, the verb for when you're in a gig and then you're like your feet are like moving to the music. In this way, this is called so the together. All right, so okay, yeah, 一齊 performances of identity in the post-2019 Hong Kong indie music scene. Okay, so at 8:12 p.m., the background music that played before the gig suddenly stopped. Instead of the lights dimming, the musicians walking onto the stage, and the crowd cheering, a hushed and deep voice came onto the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please listen carefully. Police have entered the building block. Please do not make any sound and do not be alarmed when we turn off the lights. We will resume the show when it is safe to do so, and if we have to evacuate, we will split into 3 groups that will be led by our venue staff. Please follow their instructions. And so we sat on the floor in the darkness with only one stage light to light the room. No one made a sound. 40 minutes later, the voice came back. Everything's okay now, and the speakers filled with music as if nothing had happened. And so, just briefly, the Hong Kong indie music scene is a loose community of musicians, audience members, and other participants dedicated to DIY modes of cultural production that span across multiple genres and musical styles. They differentiate themselves from the corporate-dominated mainstream cantopop music sphere in Hong Kong through upholding values of autonomy and alternativity through practices and discourse. And the gigs are normally held in venues called live houses, which is borrowed from a Japanese term called, I'm not going to try and pronounce it with a Japanese accent, because, yeah. And so the scene has always been economically and socially and culturally precarious and has been marginalized through these means by wider society. And people in the scene rent industrial building units because the rental is cheaper, but using these units for music is a violation of building codes, as Gigi mentioned. And music is culturally and socially thought of as only a hobby at most in Hong Kong. I'm sure most of us know, a lot of us know what that's like. And pursuing it is as anything more than just a hobby is generally considered a bad idea. Culturally, Hong Kong is dominated by cantopop, and the acceptance of other music in the wider public is still pretty low, despite things changing in recent times. The COVID-19 social distancing laws has made the activities of the scene doubly precarious, with threats of significant fines and jail time for those who attend gigs and organize gigs and host gigs and people who own venues. The live houses sometimes employ measures like the one that Gigi described, or that I described in the beginning, to minimize risk. And so Gigi already told us the story of Hidden Agenda. I will skip. The closure of Hidden Agenda, though, was a big deal for the scene. And these changes were described by Wong, who coined this term called the post-Hidden Agenda era in Hong Kong. And one of the characteristics of these changes is a decentralization of the scene, which was a fragmentation and fracturing of the scene, where multiple smaller live houses opened and formed a decentralized cultural network dispersed across space. And no single live house was able to symbolize the indie scene like Hidden Agenda used to symbolize before. And the other main characteristic that we will look at here is the shift of the independent scene towards an underground scene. By staying under the administrative radar and by being subtle and low-key on social media for the sake of self-protection. And so the majority of this research was conducted in ethnographic interviews, because I'm an ethnomusicologist, and online surveys were distributed to audience members at 2 gigs. And for the people who did reply my questionnaire seriously and gave me their social contact, I then conducted follow-up interviews, which were very fun. And so this project started off with me feeling like some sort of detective, where there was this mysterious phenomenon that was happening in the indie scene in approximately 2021. And the phenomenon was that a recurring theme that I kept hearing from conversations with gig organizers in 2021, maybe early 2022-ish, was that it was really easy to sell out a gig during this time compared to before the pandemic, when gigs would not even come close. They would sell out half or even less. There would be 40 people at a gig. There would be more performers than audiences sometimes. And I posit that this has to do with the ongoing battle in the cultural arena over identity in Hong Kong, where culture is a major arena of resistance against the government and against the cultural encroachment. And so the activities of the indie scene, they constitute much more than a mere form of entertainment that some people would think that it is. And the acceptance of risk from audience members and musicians alike indicates that these activities are of much higher significance. And I posit that the characteristics of the post-hidden agenda era it affords a site for the negotiation and construction of cultural identity. And so I start with explaining decentralization in the scene in the current time. Decentralization has been a major force in shifting the landscape of social relations in the scene since 2019. And gig organizers that I interviewed stated that there were many new gig organizers coming onto the scene. And many of these had social media pages that were established after 2020 and did not show their faces, did not have like a very personal, relatable image in the sense that you would see who the organizer is as a person. And these people, they were audience members turned gig organizers, and they realized that all you have to do to put on a gig is to call a bunch of bands, take a bunch of people's money, rent a venue, boom, you have a gig. And the effect of these new organizers on the scene is that they exposed people to their own social circle through social media, to the activities of the indie scene. And these people, they're not the old guard of the indie scene who basically only had friends that also went to shows anyway, or were like other artists, other experimental artists, visual artists and stuff, the culturally type people. But they had friends that spanned a much wider social network and wider society, their colleagues, their friends, maybe their family, maybe people that they share WhatsApp groups with, like Francois mentioned. And so this widened exposure explains the increase in audience, specifically new audience members. And Locke is one of the organizers of the scene. He says, it seems like people are becoming comfortable with going to underground gigs. And another organizer said, called Frank, stated that it's very easy to sell out a show compared to before 2019. And so this decentralization was a central value of the 2019 protests, as we all know. It gave grassroots individuals a new sense of agency to organize protest activities, print protest-related literature, and the centrality of this decentralization value was linked to the idealized Hong Kong identity during the protests, which is an identity of agency. And so this new Hong Kong identity of agency is being performed through gig organizing activities of the scene. And I recently started by printing a bunch of stickers that you can all come and get from me or at the welcome table. And so this increase in attendance can be attributed to the new resistance on the cultural front in Hong Kong. The 2019 protests saw a surge in the sense to protect local culture and collective expression of a unique Hong Kong identity through the widespread use of the label Hergonian and many other symbols such as that. In the audience survey that I did, all of the respondents agreed that their attendance of the indie gig contributed to Hong Kong culture. But the weird thing was that only half of them agreed that their gig attendance was motivated by their identity as a Hong Konger. And while half of the ones that did agree told something about the cultural battleground over a distinct Hong Kong identity, I think that I asked the wrong question. And that the key to understanding cultural identity construction here lies outside of labeling any simplistic or unproblematic notion of a Hong Kong identity, but in the social that is at play in the particular type of Hong Kong cultural identity construction that is happening right now in the indie scene. And so the 2019 protest movement awakened many to the possibilities of what they can represent themselves culturally with. New audiences thus went out to try out indie music, and through this began a process to search for their cultural representations in the indie scene's music. And one audience member actually stated that indie is more able to reflect the views of the creator compared to mainstream music. That he feels like he's supporting something that is made by Hong Kongers, 香港人製造, rather than just some company doing their business, selling you their product that is mass-produced. In these examples, we can see that the individuals are searching for symbols to represent themselves, that this representation is still in process and it's ongoing. Just like Rosberg said, it's always being formed. It's a process of identification. And that through the use of symbols such as indie music or even specific bands that the individuals can discover in their journey, it shows that the identities are constituted within and not outside of representation. And that they're confronted with this movable feast where, to use an analogy more native to us in the indie scene, they're trying on different band t-shirts and seeing which one fits better and at which time. And so one audience member put it this way: I started looking for shows to attend around 2021, and I began digging deeper, maybe because I felt a connection to the bands. And so the efforts for organizers to protect culture also contribute to this cultural identity construction process, while also providing an arena where this construction can occur. I asked one organizer if he saw his gig organizing activities as a way of protecting culture, and he said that after the movement, he did feel a very strong need to protect and a responsibility to pick up this mantle from the previous old guard that might be indisposed because of various reasons. And that this organizer now organizes shows every month or two, and they have expanded into doing both local bands and acts traveling in from Taiwan, and Gigi went to their gig last night. Thanks. Cool. And while the ways in which individuals find the right cultural identity t-shirt is important, what's more important in the post-hidden agenda era are the ways in which the social in music comes to play. Where it moves beyond searching for cultural identity and constitute performances of cultural identity, where one puts on the t-shirt for others to see beyond this metaphorical band t-shirt fitting room where no one else can see. And so compared to mainstream music in Hong Kong, the indie sphere is much more of a social experience. The crowd is not limited to one space by chairs, and they strongly stamp their feet or and sometimes even move their bodies violently towards the music, forming some sort of oscillating wave of bodies. I am embellishing a little bit. I asked some of my respondents about why they would choose to attend a live show as opposed to listening to music by themselves. And this respondent said, the atmosphere is very different. It's like experiencing a very unique experience. Sometimes when we mosh, which is when you'll see it in a bit, it's like I enter a different state. It's a kind of moment where I lose myself, and it's just between the performers, the songs, and myself. And other audiences are also a part of the show. Everyone is participating in the performance as a collective, like a big wave where I lose a part of myself and become a collective. Everyone's headbanging and enjoying the same thing together. And so for those of you who don't know what it's like to be in an indie gig in an industrial venue where in the middle of nowhere, this is what it could be like. So this is what we call moshing. This is a gentle mosh. People are not getting severely bumped. This is very mild. If you go to a metal show or a punk show or something similar, you might want to watch out a little bit. But generally, people are very nice. Don't worry about it. Like if you fall down, people pick you up. If you drop your phone, they'll hold up your phone and you can go and get it. And so I think the quote that I said just now demonstrates the affective power that music has on cultural identity, where it describes the social in the individual and the individual in the social. And it's a site where the self in process is a, quote, experiential process, unquote, that offers so intensely a sense of both self and others, of the subjective and the collective. So during the gig, this audience member has not only tried on this t-shirt, but he's embraced it fully and is able to hence identify with everyone else who's wearing this same metaphorical t-shirt, and he's feeling completely one with the group, while still subjectively experiencing intense feelings during the gig as an individual. And the music itself is the site where this idealistic, wistful, and ineffable vapors of this postmodern identity can be experienced and thus performed. And so emphasizing the importance, the performance aspect of cultural identity is the final piece in the post-hidden agenda era puzzle, which is the shift towards an underground scene, represented here by the fact that audiences are still going to gigs despite this legal risk. And so this is quite well put by organizer Locke. He says, here's my biggest question throughout the pandemic. Why the fuck do people still turn up? Because it's not like you don't read on the news that people get caught, but they do turn up. And so the question of why people turn up is doubly puzzling, considering that the scene's underground shift put an extra layer of intentionality between an individual and information to a show. Gig locations are no longer publicized, as Gigi mentioned, and the address is only given after you buy a ticket through social media by directly messaging the organizer. And so Hannah Arendt said that in acting and speaking, men who show who they are reveal actively their unique personal identities. And she emphasizes this need of action and speech for one to make oneself known to others in the public realm and thus perform their identities. The cultural identities of the moment are performed through the audience's presence and the gig organizer's initiative in putting on the show. And I asked one audience member whether it was worth the legal risk to attend gigs. And besides the fact that he said he's illegal, like he hasn't been caught yet, but he says the whole experience is worth it, and the feeling of being part of a crowd and we're all supporting the same bands. When I asked about what unique things were experienced in an underground gig as opposed to one in a legal venue, one audience member stated, "Everyone's more engaged. It's like we're all a big family. The exclusivity of the whole thing makes everyone feel special." And so the protest movement opened many people to the need of engaging in civil disobedience to construct the Hong Kong that they're looking for. And many became tolerant with engaging in acts that broke the law or maybe broke the law as an unfortunate byproduct of the fight for a Hong Kong that they wanted. The new underground indie scene in Hong Kong is a site where new identity is performed through music, as we can see in the surge in new audiences. Organizers and audiences see gigs as a necessity to preserve and protect culture that they want in Hong Kong, and thus they're not only willing to bear the risks, but are even comfortable with attending illegal gigs. As Locke said, I think people are just getting more comfortable with going to gigs even though now it's more illegal than ever. It sounds so weird. When you see a guy watching football and Formula One, the Formula One guy was me, on their phones at a gig, it then lets you know that, hey, if you're comfortable doing that, it means you're pretty comfortable doing this, and it means you're pretty comfortable going to an underground show. You're not really being self-conscious about it. And so through all that was being said and done by organizers and audiences alike, it can be seen that organizing and attending gigs like in the post-hidden agenda era is much more than mere entertainment for these individuals, and that their actions constitute performances of cultural identity through the preservation, protection, and support of indie music in Hong Kong. The interviews reveal the affective power that music has in allowing individuals not only to browse and choose cultural symbols that they identify with, but allowing individuals to then, through social means, perform and enact these identities in musical activity. The postmodern subject is one that is fractured and fragmented and is constantly in process, but perhaps during the fleeting moments of the violent thrashing of bodies and bass lines, identities can be constructed and lived in their ideal form. The scene provides a third space that Hart and Negri label alter-modernity. Sometimes in Hong Kong, it seems that the alternative of not being who the government wants us to be or society wants us to be is to be the exact opposite. But alter-modernity of the indie scene constructs a space where we can have the freedom not just to be who we are, but to become who we want. And maybe that's why only half of the people said that they were doing it because they were Hong Kongers. Maybe because that term, in the most general form, does not allow them the room to negotiate and express the exact identity that they want to construct or that they want to be. And so perhaps it's best stated by an audience member who then asked one statement. I asked him what he thinks is what him going to a gig is contributing to the world through his participation in the scene, and he said, I think it's identity. Like, I think I'm an indie boy, indie jai, so I support the indie scene. And so that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. We will open the floor to questions.
Thank you very much.